Hey everyone, welcome to the Eat to Win show where sports nutrition meets peak performance. Get ready for expert insights, real stories, and tips to help you win with every meal. Let's dive in.
All right, and welcome to the Winner's Circle and the Eat to Win podcast. I'm Samuel Blord, and we're here to talk about all things sports nutrition and how we help athletes win. Whether you're an athlete or just passionate about nutrition, this is the place to be. Today, we're thrilled to have an amazing guest with us. Joining us is Briana Bruinooge, registered dietitian nutritionist and specialist in sports dietetics. We'll be breaking down nutrition for endurance athletes and how to eat enough to perform your best. Let's jump right in. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Samuel.
So what got you into sports nutrition? How did you find yourself into this field?
Always been really passionate about health, and especially when I was in college, I took a nutrition course and I thought that was just so eye-opening and such a good preventative health benefit for people rather than being a PA or a doctor I thought about, but I didn't really want to touch people. So nutrition, that was perfect.
Totally understand. I briefly considered nursing until I saw what nurses did, and I was like, it's a very valuable profession, but the touching and the fluids was not what I wanted to do. So I totally understand. So that's how you got into nutrition. How did you narrow it down specifically to sports nutrition?
That's a good question. I studied a lot of nutrition before I even got to sports nutrition, and I was really passionate about sustainable food systems. I did my dietetic internship at Montana State University, where we studied sustainable food systems. And then it wasn't until after college where I took a job with the Minnesota Twins baseball organization, and I got to go there for spring training. They practiced in Fort Myers in Florida, where I got to work with professional athletes and the minor league baseball athletes as well. And I really loved that. And I loved working with the minor league athletes because they wanted to do anything that it took to get to the major league. So nutrition was such a vital role in that. And I really liked education and teaching, and sports nutrition is so different from just generic nutrition that maybe you hear.
Absolutely. I love working with highly motivated athletes or really just highly motivated any kind of client, but athletes, I love working with them. So for baseball nutrition, what did you find that was the most interesting thing that stuck out to you about working with that specific population?
For that specific population, I think it was definitely more on their nutrition foundation. So unlike endurance athletes, for baseball athletes, a lot of what they're doing are these like short bursts of movements. And so we really focus on how to make your athletes plate breakfast, lunch, dinner, and ensure that they're eating enough, which looks a little bit different from a lot of the runners and cyclists that I do see today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. What would you say, like, if a baseball player is approaching you, would you say, like, generally their number one concern? Are they trying to put on muscle? Are they trying to, like, improve speed in between the bases? Like, what is typically, like, their performance, like, motivating?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the position, like if they're pitcher or catcher or a different position. But I would say just in general, being healthy for them means that they are able to have enough energy for the day-to-day life. And this is when I was there, it was during spring training. So I don't think they had a day off. So also trying to prevent overuse injuries. There's also a lot of questions about supplements, creatine being, I think, the number one for baseball players for those like short, quick bursts of movements to try to gain muscle mass. And it's really interesting that the rules and regulations for baseball are very strict. So there would be at times debating whether cereal would be a food that would be considered a supplement or not, just based off of some of the language. So I also got to work with a lot of different food companies who would maybe give us samples that could be types of cottage cheese or protein bars. We had to make sure we're specific and didn't include anything that the league would deem as like a supplement necessarily.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know that. So baseball's pretty strict about supplements?
They were when I was there, which was in 2019. So
Okay.
I don't know if that's changed or not.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So baseball is where you worked for a little bit. So you've kind of jumped over to endurance athletes. How did you find yourself there? Did you do any endurance athlete sports as growing up, or how did you find yourself over to that field?
Yeah, I grew up playing soccer, which is definitely an endurance sport. I think when I played, there was not a lot of nutrition education. And for a lot of the athletes that I see today are actually a lot of runners. I think because running is a sport that almost anyone can do. You got to grab the sneakers, but then you do have to pay for a lot of races if you're into that, or sports nutrition fuel. So it's not for free, but I definitely think it can be accessible. And same thing with cycling, although cycling is a bit more expensive. You got to have the bikes.
Mm-hmm.
But with that endurance sports, a lot of athletes are generally looking into their health to be healthier, to live a healthy lifestyle. And sometimes that actually can hurt you. So for example, when I grew up, I thought, processed food was bad and whole food is so much better. And I also really like to run. And I just like to be active in general. So I would often run after soccer practice, or would it be that weird for me to run a half marathon every week or every other week, which I don't necessarily recommend to people. And I definitely wouldn't fuel with any water and no salt and no carbohydrates. And I would wonder why my stomach would hurt so badly. And of course, now I do know. So yeah, I definitely grew up wanting to be healthy and I love to move. And there was a period of my life where I definitely didn't have the education and knowledge that I have now that I wish I did, because I think it definitely would have prevented a lot of illnesses and injury and just overall fatigue. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will say, a lot of the sports dietitians I've talked to, I feel like at some point, even myself, have had a similar experience where we're looking back as either they were an athlete or they had a close sibling or friend that was an athlete, and they saw the impact of bad nutrition. I know for me, I was a wrestler, and so wrestlers have to make weight, and somehow most wrestlers have figured out probably the worst way to make weight, and that's what most of them do. So yeah, I think for a lot of sports dietitians, they were sitting in those basic nutrition classes at the start of their education program going, man, if only I had known this a long time ago,
Yeah. Even I feel like Nutrition 101 was even more confusing, because it's well, now I have all of these questions that I want to get answered. So that definitely led me to majoring in nutrition and really finding even more nutrition education, and even beyond my internship to really nail down, well, what does it mean to be a sports dietitian to help people? And then I got my CSSD, which is your certificate for being a specialist in sports dietetics, which is a mouthful, or you can just call me a specialist in sports nutrition. And that's an exam that you have to take every 5 years, and you're up to date on the most up-to-date nutrition. And yeah, I definitely love learning. I'm always learning, and I'm always finding new resources and research to help my clients, because the more education I know about nutrition, the more it also comes down to helping my clients. What are the barriers to that goal that they have? And that goes far beyond just what foods to eat. It's when to eat, the meal composition, what's getting in your way, what preconceived nutrition myths do you have that maybe we need to go over, because everyone is biased, and I definitely was and am, and trying to open our brain to say, hey, I actually need more carbohydrates or more salt or more sugar now that I'm an endurance athlete, compared to maybe a baseball player or someone who isn't doing as much endurance exercise, where you do need a significant more amount of carbohydrates than just the average person.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say I would say it's not just soccer players or endurance athletes. There's a lot of athletes who they're convinced that they are eating too much, and it's quite the opposite. Yeah, I don't know if it's because of certain just body standards that we're used to seeing as the example types, or it's just team culture, but it's not just soccer players, wrestlers, boxers. There's a lot of different sports where the athlete is absolutely convinced, I need to train harder, and also I need to eat less. And you're no, man, you could use another 1,000 calories in your diet. Matter of fact, please get that milkshake on the way home after practice, please.
Yeah, totally. You're exactly right. I would say a major misconception is people think that they have to eat less, when I'm telling 99% of my clients to eat more.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we kind of touched on it, but are there any other misconceptions that when it comes to managing nutrition for endurance athletes? So obviously they think they're eating too much. They're probably not eating enough. Any other ones that you feel like you are often repeating when it comes to misconceptions?
I think carbs in general, there's so many misconceptions around, and you need carbohydrates whether you're an athlete or not, even if you're a sedentary person and you don't get out of bed every day, because our brain and our body need carbohydrates, and carbohydrates also have fiber. They also have a lot of nutrients. They're super beneficial for just our being, just sitting here and talking to you. I need
Yes,
carbs, and I haven't worked
absolutely.
out today yet. And then on top of that, people need even more carbohydrates. And so the misconception is people are often underfueled before they even exercise, and then they're still underfueled when they exercise. And they come to me thinking, you're going to tell me not to eat this, this, and that. And I'm really like, actually, like, we need to eat breakfast and eat every 2 to 4 hours. And what's your carb at all of these meals and snacks is very much something that seems very surprising to many of my clients. And
Absolutely.
I would say we live in a very thin praised or fat phobic world also. And so a lot of my clients also think they need to lose weight. And so they're always asking, what can I do to lose weight and all of these things? And regardless of whether they want to maintain or lose weight, I'm always trying to get them to nourish their body. What is your baseline? What do you need? And it's often more. And sometimes clients do lose weight by even eating more, because it's not just calories in, calories out. We're not a robot. There are so many things that go into our body, our hormones, our stress levels, our sleep, how we recover. Are we getting enough protein, fat, carbohydrates, our micronutrients? There's so many micronutrients of concern for athletes, and especially endurance athletes, and then especially for female endurance athletes. And then if you're a vegetarian or a vegan female endurance athletes, you've got a lot more that you have to pay special attention to.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to working with athletes, what is your typical, are they like marathon runners? Are they like just kind of shorter, like cross country bursts? Do you have any like ultra endurance? Like what is your typical endurance athlete that you work with?
Marathon runners and half marathon runners. I work with a lot of coaches, Mercuria Running. I work with their coaches. They're out of Colorado, Florida, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where I'm in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I have a runner's course. So I definitely see a lot of runners. I also see a lot of cross country. That could be high school athletes. And I also work directly with Bowdoin College. They're in Maine. And I work with their cross country team. And I've also worked with Southern New Hampshire University, so SNU, their cross country team. And definitely a theme I see in all of these college athletes are they're not eating enough. And when you're not eating enough, your weight might be the same, which is kind of confusing. We think, oh, I must be eating enough. My weight's the same, but it could actually be the same, or it could be higher or lower. But then they're more susceptible to RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport. They could be susceptible to overtraining syndrome. College students in general are susceptible to disordered eating and eating disorders. So I work directly with Bowdoin College in their health services and eating disorder team. And I also work with all of their athletes. So not just cross country, but I would say I see mostly cross country and rowing would be the top two I see there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, especially when it comes to weight. I think a lot of people don't realize that how much your weight fluctuates during the day. And because with wrestlers, you have to like get that timing down precisely. Like you want your weight to fluctuate down, hit that weight, and then immediately refuel. So I feel like wrestlers are pretty in touch with that. But like, this is one of the first things I often hit is like, hey, if your weight is going 3 pounds difference during the day, you did not lose that much in fat. That is almost entirely water or the weight of your food. And so that's like, I don't know why, but it just everyone assumes is if the weight changed, it's because it's calories and it's because I changed in fat. And I think for a lot of people, that's like a big light bulb moment. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Especially when I hit them with the 1 pound of fat equals approximately 3,500 calories. They're like, whoa, okay, yeah, fair enough. I did not lose 3 pounds today.
Yeah, totally. We were like trained as robots to be like, all right, calories in, calories out. If my weight changes, it's because of the peanut butter, or it's because of whatever. And if that were true, then dietitians wouldn't really need to be around, because it would be more simple. And then you asked about ultra endurance. I do see some ultra endurance runners, and that's definitely a little bit different than marathon, where marathon runners, I do a lot of very specific math, like 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour. If you're running more than 2 hours, trying to get up to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. For ultra runners, it's similar, but it's usually more whole foods. So what I mean by that is they might be eating a burrito, they could be having a pizza, a PB&J, or more whole food because you're going for way longer. And if you think about a day, if I just didn't even exercise all day, I'd still need to eat food, breakfast, lunch, dinner, probably some snacks. And if you're running for that long all day, kind of hard to not be in such a major deficit. So a big thing that we work on is your nutrition foundation leading up to a race, be that a half marathon, or ultra, and then especially your intra running nutrition. But I would say intra running nutrition is like the cherry on top. And it's really, if you fueled well, you're going to start that race out well. But if you're on empty and you just start with like, I'll just maximize the carbohydrates I eat during the race, it's not going to end well for anyone. That leaves people not finishing races. And that can be really mentally upsetting.
For sure. Yeah. That would be really sad to train for a race for a long time and then not be able to finish it. It's something I think that really hit me because I was never did running growing up. I did baseball, football, and wrestling. So never quite did any sort of endurance athlete sport. But what hit me in the past Olympics is like, especially those shorter races, I was like, oh, they're just sprinting for 3 miles. They're not even really necessarily coasting. They're just all out sprinting faster than I can run for 3 miles. That's incredible. And then especially for when you just going those further distances, I obviously not as quite as dialed in on as you, but like the precision nutrition with like the intra race running, I think that's fascinating. So you said definitely carbs during the race is really important, but are there any other like minerals or vitamins that are for them to hit? Magnesium, one of them?
Not necessarily. So for runners, like if you're running, let's say for an hour, generally you're going to lose fluid, you're going to lose carbohydrates, and you're going to lose what you lose in your sweat. And in your sweat, you're right, you do lose magnesium. It could be anywhere between 0 to 36 grams worth of magnesium. I think it's per liter that you lose. I'd have to look that up. But normally the biggest thing you're looking for is your sodium. So sodium chloride is your salt. So that's just table salt. And everyone sweats differently, which is the hardest part because if you get it wrong, if you have too little salt or too much salt, you can be nauseated, you can be fatigued, you can have a headache. So you're really trying to dial in, like, did I get enough sodium for this run or not enough? So personally, I'm a really super sweaty person. If I'm doing any long distance or even just a hard effort, I'm going to have sweat everywhere and I'm going to have salt on my face, on my eyebrows. I've had it on my eyelashes. It's been frozen when I'm running in the winter, and I can taste it on my lips. So if that's anyone listening, you're like, yes, that's me. I wring out my sweat after I run or cycle or whatever. Probably a really heavy sweater. And then to know if you're a heavy, salty sweater, you would taste that salt. So that can change depending on like your effort, the duration, the temperature outside, or even how much clothes you're wearing. So if it's cold out, but you're super bundled up, if you're running inside on a treadmill, but you like to keep it at 70 degrees, that's still hot. So definitely making sure that you understand your sweat rate is something that I practice with people. There are different things you can do to actually test your sweat rate, like see like how much sodium did I lose in this hour. They're not perfect, but I do use them on some people. But normally we just kind of guess and check. And so typically around 300 milligrams per hour of sodium is the minimum, but I've seen people do 1,000 milligrams per hour. And I think I'm somewhere close to that.
Crazy.
Depending on what I'm doing. So that's super important during. So carbohydrates, especially sugar, usually you're using like goos, gels, or some kind of like powder liquid nutrition that has sugar. And then you are also using some kind of salt. Sometimes salt will be in the goos and gels, but honestly, it's not usually a lot. If you look at the back of a supplement, it might say like 15 milligrams or 60 milligrams. And if you're only taking 2 gels an hour, it's definitely the math isn't adding up to 300 to 1,000 milligrams an hour. So I also teach people what kind of fuel do you want to use, practice with that fuel. If you're an ultra runner, thinking about like, all right, if you had whole foods included, if you're having like potatoes with salt on them or other things, it's a little bit less mathy because you don't have a ton of time to do math while you're out there that long, but also just making sure you're consuming enough throughout the hour. So generally for half and full marathon, consuming some kind of nutrition every 30 minutes is ideal. And then especially for ultras, same thing, but maybe even more.
So I guess as someone not as familiar with it, how do they carry? Do they have a backpack that they just carry with them? They got just like a pouch of salt and food and they just eat it
Yes,
while they're
that's a
running?
good question. It depends. There are a lot of creative ways to carry stuff. It depends on what race you're doing because different races don't allow backpacks. So you do have to get a little bit creative on how you're going to carry all this stuff. I know there's definitely a lot of different kinds of shorts that have a lot of different pockets, or spandex, or sports bras with pockets, or hats with pockets even. If you're carrying a handheld, sometimes they're like a handheld water bottle, there would be pockets to hold other fuel there. For ultra races, generally you're not carrying around a baked potato with salt with you. That would be more so at like the fueling stations, what's available there. Sometimes during marathon and half marathon, they might have some, I don't know, chips or maybe a banana or something, which you could do. But I definitely try to make sure people are practicing what they're going to do on a race day.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember the runner's name, but I remember there was an ultra endurance runner who was famous for ordering pizza and then he would eat it while he was running. So he'd have the pizza guy drive up and he's like, look, I'm going to be running from here to here and I need you to find me. Give me my pizza. I was like, that is crazy.
Calories matter. And that's
it's salty. I mean, it's obviously it's like not like, no one thinks pizza when they're thinking of perfect health food, but athletes are so metabolically different from people who are not athletes. It's incredible the nutrition how it changes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that for marathon because that would be extra fatty and hard to digest.
Absolutely, yeah. He was running like 70 miles. Like he was running from city to city, like for just to do it. So I don't know. Yeah, it changes, but I thought it was hilarious. It was one of those stories that stick with me. I was like, that's awesome. It's very, very innovative thinking.
And then also water. Fluid is so different per person. The minimum would be 8 ounces per hour. But that could be up to 32 ounces per hour for some people.
Yeah. So, kind of like supplements, like what are the kind of things that you would say stay away from? And so what are some that are like, maybe it's a good idea depending on like the diet? Like what do you kind of recommend there?
Yeah, supplements, I definitely do an individualized approach because if you can get everything through diet, amazing. It's definitely hard to do. I would say a misconception about sports nutrition in general is that like people are afraid of sodium or afraid of sugar or carbs. And if you are marathon training, you do need more processed carbohydrates. You do need more salt. So if someone listening is like, I make everything from scratch and I stay away from sugar and salt, and you're not feeling good and you're lightheaded and you're fatigued and you're having trouble sleeping, you're probably not getting enough carbohydrates and salt. It's definitely really hard to eat enough calories on a whole food diet. 100% is doable, but it's definitely very filling. And oftentimes, if you need to eat more food and if you're eating more fibrous food, that can be hard to stomach all of that literally because your stomach is going to be full. So oftentimes people need to eat by the clock. Whether your stomach is growling or not, you need to eat breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, and sometimes another snack, eating every 3 to 4 hours generally. So if anyone listening is also like, I eat every 6-7 hours, it might not be enough.
Yeah. Okay. And then another thing, like, so I've something that I feel like is a nutrition trend that I just constantly get asked about is carb loading. So do you have your athletes carb load, or is that something that you're like, it kind of depends. If you already are eating a good diet, you don't really need to eat 4 plates of pasta the night before a race. Yeah.
It's a good question. Definitely. I recommend carb loading to anyone doing any endurance event that's longer than 90 minutes because even if you ate 4 plates of pasta, believe it or not, that wouldn't be carb loading. I don't even think you would hit the amount of grams for carbs you would need. Plates of pasta.
Just basically rookie numbers of pasta. We need more pasta, please.
Yeah, you need a lot more of everything. So something fun that I do with clients is talking about how much carbs you would need to eat in bagel equivalents. So I can do it with you if you want. All right. So if you want to give me a generic, either your weight or someone's weight, like we could do a 180-pound person. So if we said a 180-pound person, I'm going to divide that by 2.2 and get 81 kilograms. If this person exercises for an hour a day, I'm going to multiply that by 5. So I'm getting 400 grams of carbohydrates this 180-pound person needs to consume every single day. That's not carb loading, that's just in general. And if I divided that by bagels, a bagel's around 60 grams of carbs. So you're looking at almost 7 bagels a day. So that would be 7 bagel equivalents per day. I don't recommend anyone necessarily to eat 7 bagels in one day, but if you know what a bagel looks like and you need at least 2 of those at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if you're not getting anywhere close to that with other carbohydrates on your plate, you're probably low. And then for carb loading, I would do a 180-pound person, which is 81 kilograms. And I would multiply that by 10 to 12. So now times 12, we're at 981 grams of carbs. And that would be divided by 60 for 60 grams of carbs would be 16 bagel equivalents in a day. So as you can imagine, those 4 plates of pasta do not equal 16 bagel equivalents.
Wow.
So it's a lot of carbohydrates, and you will feel like a Pillsbury Doughboy or Pillsbury Doughgirl. It's not the most comfy starting the race like that. I promise, though, you will have the best run you've ever raced, because every climb that's ever done it is like, you know what, not my favorite. Definitely sick of pastas and bagels and rice. But I did it, and I've never recovered better. So the biggest part of that is recovery, because we only store a certain amount of carbohydrates in our body, and it takes a lot to be completely saturated with our muscle glycogen stores and our liver glycogen stores. So you have to eat those 16 bagel equivalents and basically do a taper week, get to the start of the race feeling very kind of puffy, and you're running, and then you're running strong and you're recovering strong. So that's the benefit of carbohydrate loading.
I love the unit of measure bagel equivalents. That's amazing.
It's the best way to really be like, well, how much is 400 or 900 grams of carbohydrate?
That's awesome. All right, so we're going to take a short pause. Stay with us for a short break and to thank our sponsors. You're listening to the Eat to Win podcast with Samuel Bullard.
Liquid Fuel is a new sports and hydration product formulated by a sports dietitian to give athletes the edge to train and compete longer. It contains the low glycemic carbohydrate palinitose, designed to keep blood sugar levels more stable and to provide energy for 3 to 4 hours without the blood sugar crash seen in other leading sports drinks. Its unique 4-part electrolyte formula includes 50% of your daily magnesium to optimize muscle function. Liquid Fuel is naturally sweetened along with no artificial ingredients or colors. Currently being used by high school, collegiate, and professional teams, Liquid Fuel allows you to live your life with the confidence knowing that you're properly fueling your body. Visit drinkliquidfuel.com and use the code MSD10 to get 10% off your order.
All right, welcome back to the Eat to Win podcast. Today we are talking with Briana. Let's get back to it. So I'm sure this is a topic that you have been asked about before. It used to be a lot more trendy. It's a little less trendy now. I'm thankful it is, especially with working with wrestlers. But when you have an athlete that comes to you and says, hey, I want to do keto and I also want to run endurance. How have you handled that? How do you handle that?
It's a good question. I always meet people where they're at. I will always tell you my expert opinion. I don't recommend keto for really anyone unless you have epilepsy, which is where that research really stemmed from, especially for endurance athletes, because you are burning so much carbohydrates. You do need so much for just living as a human, and then plus that level of activity. That being on a ketogenic diet is not very helpful for that. It's also dangerous long-term, in my opinion, because carbohydrates give you so much fiber, which is really important for your gastrointestinal health. If you're not eating enough fiber, that can cause a lot of issues, constipation, gastrointestinal issues in the future, like diverticulosis, diverticulitis when you get older. And the research that is there for a keto diet is really only like 6 months at a time, especially if you are someone who doesn't have a lot of body fat on you. It's not necessarily recommended in my eyes that why would you need to be on a ketogenic diet? I know a lot of people do it for weight loss. However, I don't recommend people actively try for weight loss while training for such a hard event like a marathon or an ultra. And in a lot of cases, people actually gain weight. And so if you're someone who is looking to lose weight and you gain weight during marathon training, that's not necessarily for you. So I definitely recommend marathon training for fun and for performance. And we do this for fun. So making sure that you are well nourished and well fueled. So I basically just go over the pros and cons of being on a ketogenic diet. Usually people come to me trying to get off of a ketogenic diet because it can really hurt your metabolism, and that lasts for months and years. The damaging effects of being on a ketogenic for a long time take a long time to get. And the misconception is that you lose a lot of weight. You do, because your carbs are gone, and your carbs weigh something.
Yes.
For every gram of glycogen that you store, you hold 3 milliliters of water. So if I didn't eat carbs this whole week, I might lose 10 pounds by the end of the week, not 10 pounds of fat.
Yes.
And then once they eat carbs again, they gain the weight back, and people get really upset about that or confused about that. And that definitely should be addressed in the media. So I am not a fan of the diet, if you can tell.
Yeah.
But if people are on it, I definitely come from a place of understanding and trying to just educate them on what could be a better option.
Yeah, for sure. I will say for me, when I've had athletes that come to me to do that, it's the underlying motivation almost always is they believed that would help them improve. So I usually just try to tie it back to like, you want to improve. I understand you heard this diet might help you. I really don't think it will. But I understand with that desire to use nutrition to improve. Absolutely. We can go with that, But I love that you brought up that the weight loss associated with keto is largely water weight, especially at the start. Nowhere have I seen that more clearly illustrated than when I did during my dietetic internship. I was at a bariatric clinic, and before surgery, what they'll do is they'll put them on about 72 hours of just nothing but protein shakes, low carb protein shakes. And what happens because it has to shrink the liver to get the liver to get out of the way. That's your water weight right there. It's all those carbs in the liver. And it was so cool to see that like very practically applied so that the surgeon could have access to the stomach. But that analogy always stuck with me because you could so clearly see the weight drop every single time.
That's so
and you could see how well they stuck to the pure protein diet. Sometimes they came back and the surgeon was like, your liver didn't shrink. We're going to have to reschedule. So that I thought that was always very interesting. And actually for wrestlers, we actually use that to make weight. So we actually take advantage of the fact that it's water weight when you lose carbs to temporarily. I mean, obviously you have a little less energy for a little bit, but it's better than losing muscle.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, I love how nutrition is a tool and it can be used in different situations. It can be applied and be very helpful. Okay. So that was kind of a trend that I think a lot of dietitians were the most excited about, but was definitely one that was there. I think research wise, I think it was an interesting idea to like kind of toy with. And I don't know, I was definitely interested to at least learn the perspective behind it. What are any other emerging trends that you see, especially in the endurance athlete world, that you like or that you see as like a positive trend?
Yeah, I think that really just the messaging around nutrition, or at least in my world, probably because I'm researching it and surrounding myself with people who do view food as nourishment. Do you think the message that well-fed is best, or the more fuel, the better, rather than in olden times? I feel like it was really like less food, the better, do the bare minimum. You only have to fuel if you're doing activity more than 90 minutes. Which I always say you can get away with, right? Like, yeah, you can run a half marathon on empty. I've done it plenty of times. I wouldn't say it was healthy for me or good for me or helped me. I didn't recover well. I definitely had worsened anxiety and stomach pain because of that. Because
it sounds miserable to
you're not fueling. Like I could do it, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately I've seen people run marathons on empty, and that's even more dangerous because you're going even longer, and after about 2 hours of activity you really don't have much glycogen stores left, and if you didn't fuel well before, you probably don't have much. And so that's where, if you've ever seen videos of marathon runners literally crawling to the finish line, they call that bonking. They don't have any more glycogen stores. There's none left in there, and their body is preserving their life to not move because your brain constantly needs glycogen. It needs glucose every second of the day, and if you don't have enough, your body's not going to want you to be able to run. So, yeah, that's intense.
Yeah. One thing I deal with wrestlers is a condition of hyponatremia, and I know that's also can be a thing to keep an eye out for endurance athletes. So how do you educate your athletes about that?
Yeah, hyponatremia, that's when your sodium in your blood is low. And so it's more common if you are drinking plain water and doing a marathon, and the marathon takes you, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours. It's especially more common because you have more time to just drink plain water, which I don't recommend, because if you're just drinking plain water and you're not taking in any salt tabs or salt in the form of powder in like a sports beverage, then you can become like your hands can get swollen. You, in severe cases, it would be a coma because you're not getting enough of that concentration of sodium in your blood. But you can get really tired. Your blood pressure can decrease. I actually saw it a lot this summer because I think it was a very hot summer. So people playing pickleball or tennis outside and just thinking, I'll just drink water. That can really drop, and you can get really, really anxious and just confused and tired. And yeah, so I definitely try to educate people on what they need during a marathon to make sure that you have fluid, you also have salt, and you also have carbs, because those three combinations help the hydration. Yeah. How do you educate people on hyponatremia for wrestling?
Well, I largely hit it from, oftentimes you'll use a strategy called water loading to rapidly lose water weight to make weight. And so that obviously involves drinking a bunch of water, your kidneys getting used to processing that water. And then you essentially take advantage of the fact that your kidneys take a minute to adapt to that. So you lose what I call free water, which is water you didn't have to sweat off to make weight. But obviously that involves them drinking a ton of water. And the risk for, at least for wrestlers or really any kind of weight class athlete, is they'll think, I was supposed to drink a gallon of water today and I'm behind. I have this half gallon that I need to drink and it's 8 o'clock. I'm just going to chug it. So I'm like, that's like the first thing I do. Is like, okay, so we might talk about water loading. You've probably heard about water loading. The first thing, do not chug large volumes of water ever, please. So I'm proud to say I've never had a wrestler that's worked with me ever get in hyponatremia, because it's quite easy to prevent. You just don't chug a gallon of water in 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That's why would you? But yeah. Oftentimes athletes are very motivated, and if they think that they're supposed to do something, they will do it because they want to win. And so, yeah. That's kind of usually where I've run into the concern of that, which is also wrestlers often think salt is bad because salt causes you to retain water, and I'm trying to lose weight. So it's a combination of those two. It's, I need to be water loading, but when you're water loading, you're supposed to be having salt. So yeah, that's kind of where I run into it oftentimes.
Yeah, even hikers too, that's definitely a population, especially if you're hiking in like a really dry environment and you don't really like feel the sweat coming off of you. You're just drinking plain water. That can be dangerous. So you do get salt in food. If your salt has food, like especially packaged food tends to have more salt, but that's definitely something I talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of a hypothetical question for you. If you could collaborate with anyone in the field of sports nutrition, who would be your like go-to person? Like, it'd be fun to work with that person and solve X nutrition problem.
Yeah, that was a really hard question. I don't know, to be honest. I think that my first thought was I'd love to collaborate with someone who has a PhD in nutrition or who is in more of like the organic chemistry field, because I do feel like our two careers collide, but there is like a gap, right? There's someone who is the scientist who is doing the science, and then there's people like us who are trying to translate that science and bring it into terms of, hey, athlete, this is what you can do, what's meant by this study. So I think it would be really cool to collaborate with someone in that field to get more of that like science down and to learn together what is the best translation for our athletes. Which is hard to do because a lot of the studies are in isolation. I had someone today ask me, do I have to eat 15 minutes after I exercise, or will, muscle protein synthesis not work? And I was like, no, your muscle protein synthesis will work even 24 hours after. But we're not just focusing on muscle protein synthesis. You only have so many hours in the day. You need to eat enough calories, macronutrients, micronutrients. So if you're not eating for another 2-3 hours and you're eating everything in your pantry when you get home, yeah, eat within 15 minutes. But if it's someone who is about to eat in an hour and they don't necessarily have the time or want to eat a snack right after, maybe they don't have to. So that's really where that like translation is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if someone asked me that question, I don't know if I'd have an answer immediately available off the top of my head. It'd probably be someone random. I don't think it'd be like nutrition related. It'd probably just be like David Goggins because he's motivating. I don't know. All right. So rapid fire question round. So this is 5 questions, short answers. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. Coffee or tea?
I like the taste of coffee, but it makes me jittery. So I am more of a tea drinker. And every time I drink a cup of coffee, shouldn't have done it. So fortunately.
Okay. Morning person or night owl?
I'm a day person. I need like 9 hours of sleep. So yeah, I would say I'm just, my energy's by the
Option
day.
C, neither. Favorite post-race recovery food?
My favorite post-race recovery food is definitely a meatball sub. I think me and my friends have this just like icon of the meatball sub, especially if we did like a long rock climbing day or hike. It always makes me think of just like a hard effort day. You want the calories, the protein, the fat, the carbs, and usually you can get it most places.
Awesome. Okay. Best advice you've ever received about managing nutrition for athletes?
That's a hard question because I feel like the advice would be through all of the research or materials or resources or continuing education credits that I've looked at. I would say it's maybe not the best advice, but the most surprising, I would say, as of recently that I learned is that athletes can actually have high cholesterol or a high A1C, high fasting blood sugar, if they're not fueling enough, if you're under fueling. And I thought that was so interesting because for many months, I was so confused why this ultra endurance runner had prediabetes, because in my eyes, I'm like, you're not eating enough. You actually need more carbs. It's not really adding up. And I also see a lot of people who are struggling to eat enough. That might be for, if they have an eating disorder or disordered eating, or just they aren't sure how much they're supposed to be eating, and their cholesterol will be really high. And I'll even get referrals from doctors being like, could be familial. I'm not sure why. So that was definitely recent information that if anyone listening is like, I have high cholesterol and I'm an ultra runner or I'm a marathon runner, that's not the only reason, but it is one of the reasons. So making sure that you are, that you're eating enough carbohydrates and you're practicing meal timing. So you're not saving everything till 8 p.m.
And I mean, you might not, but do you recall like what the mechanism of action, like were they able to identify why that was occurring?
No, I think that's why it's so not really known, at least in what I know. I think it does have a lot to do with just eating enough in general, making sure that you also have enough iron plays a role in it too. When we're eating enough in general, all of our hormones should work. If we're not eating enough, a lot of our hormones don't work as well. Insulin, which is involved with your liver and is involved with managing your sugar in your body, that could obviously be affected because that's a hormone. So if you're not eating enough, all your hormones don't work as well over time. That includes insulin, which includes, your response to your A1C, your blood sugar levels.
Interesting.
And then for cholesterol, the idea, I think, is because if you're not eating enough, your body is in like a survival mode. It's trying to mobilize the fats and the cholesterol. I don't know if that's been researched necessarily for the mechanism of action, but that would be my assumption.
Yeah, it makes me not even want to. I just know there's so many wrestlers that are probably the default way wrestlers make weight. I just know that if we had started doing blood tests, they'd be like, "What is happening?"
I bet.
Okay. So what? Last question, rapid fire question is one thing people don't know about you.
One people don't know is that I'm also a part-time chef. So
Wow.
I am involved with a company called First Descents, and they help people who have been impacted by cancer, and they are aged anywhere between 18 to 39. So young adults impacted by cancer or other serious conditions like multiple sclerosis. And I go all over the US. So I might be in Colorado, or Monte could be Oregon or even North Carolina. And they'll either go surfing, they'll go kayaking, or they will go rock climbing. So first descents, like descending down the river for kayakers for whitewater kayaking. So it's a really cool organization. They also have a cookbook. Have it right here is one of them. I am in there a couple times if you want to check them out, but they also have a website, so you can find some other stuff on there. And they do a lot of nourishing meals, a lot of plant-based meals, and especially people who have cancer or other conditions, they might have to be on keto, or they might not eat nuts. They might not be able to eat meat, or the opposite. So it's definitely very challenging trying to accommodate so many different dietary needs. And it's so super fun, and it's a great community.
Absolutely. That sounds really cool. As we're kind of closing out here, are there any books or relevant kind of resources that you often send athletes towards that you think are helpful, especially in the field of endurance athletes, that you feel like could be valuable for a lot of our listeners? If they haven't checked out, X resource or book, they should probably check it out if they're trying to better understand endurance, nutrition, that kind of thing.
That's a good question. I would say in terms of resources, there's so many dietitians who specialize in endurance athlete nutrition, and there's a lot of free blogs or guides, my website included. So it's www.nenutritionexercise.com/blog. There's also Kylie Van Horn. She is from Fly Nutrition. She has a book coming out that's called Practical Fueling for Endurance, and that comes out March 3rd of next year. So I'm excited to read that as well. She has a ton of free resources. There is realnutritionllc.com. That's by Marissa Michael, and she has an endurance book for rock climbers. So specifically rock climbers. She also has courses on just like cycling and endurance athletes. And then hollyfuelednutrition.com. She specializes in runners, so also a lot of marathon runners. She has a ton of good information and free resources as well. And then also Megan Featherston. She owns featherstonenutrition.com. She has tons of recipes and information that can be really helpful. And another book is, it's called Sick Enough. It is right here. It's not necessarily for endurance athletes. That's the wrong one. That's Essential Sports Nutrition by Marnie Sumball, which is also a good book. But Sick Enough is a guide to the medical complications of eating disorders. And I think every practitioner and healthcare provider and really every person should read it. I do think that eating disorders are so misunderstood. And if more people knew about them, then maybe we could catch the signs and symptoms of undereating and underfueling earlier.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. It's got to be one of the most thorough answers to that question I've asked. So if y'all are listening, definitely go check out those resources, because that's quite an extensive list. I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff there. And just kind of finally, kind of last two questions. What is, if there's one key takeaway you want, an endurance athlete who's kind of trying to get into endurance athlete nutrition, what's the one key takeaway you want them to walk away from this conversation with?
One key takeaway is don't be afraid to fuel. I think that we grow up in a time that is, eat less or be careful what you put on your plate. And it really should be make sure you get enough on your plate. And what are we missing? And what nourishment needs to happen? And especially if you're engaging in a new activity and you're exercising more, you really need more food, more fuel throughout the day, snacks or on your plates. And I know it can be really difficult depending on the environment the athlete's in. If they have parents or friends who are concerned about food or obsessed with losing weight, can make it really hard. So trying to surround yourself with people that do prioritize fuel can be a good.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's it for today's episode. Oh, actually, sorry. One more thing. How can the audience get in touch with you?
Oh, sure. You touch with me at my website, www.nenutritionexercise.com. You could also find that on the /contact. And I do have a wait list. So if you do want to see me one-on-one, you can get on my wait list or check out my website. I have some fun resources and blogs and recipes. I also have a runner's nutrition course. So if you do want to do a self-paced course, you're someone who's like, yes, I am a student, I love to do that, That is available. It's 8 modules. And to stay tuned, you can get on my newsletter if you head to my website. And I will hopefully be doing a live version of my Nutrition for Runners blueprint come this spring in 2025.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Winner's Circle and the Eat to Win podcast. Big thanks to Briana for joining us and sharing her expertise. If you find today's insights helpful and valuable, be sure to subscribe and share with your community. Also, do us a big favor to rate and review us. Until next time, keep winning.
Thanks for joining us on the Eat to Win show. Remember, every meal is a step toward victory. Until next time, stay strong and keep winning.